So I'm going to show you how to extract a cloud from the blue sky so that we can use it as mist layers and mist clouds in the area of our waterfalls. So I have a bunch of different photographs here taken with a digital camera, and I'm going to show you how to do one of these. So we look through the alpha channels, the RGB channels, for the cleanest channel, the one with the least amount of grain. In this case, the blue channel has a lot of grain. We're going to copy the cleanest channel and paste it in as a mask to work with this particular layer. Then I'm going to go and make sure that we don't have any hard edges. So I'm going to garbage out the edges, the perimeter of the cloud, and paint with a soft brush around so that all the blue disappears softly. And then I'm going to go into the alpha channel and I'm going to apply a curve. Basically try and make the sky values as black as possible and the cloud values as bright as possible. We don't want it to be purely black and white because then we'd have a very hard-edged cloud. So we're going to leave it somewhat soft. So in the end, it basically cuts out the cloud out of the blue sky. Now there's a little bit of blue still bleeding through there. We can treat that with a curve or transparency or both. But the goal here is to make this cloud blend into the area where there's all this mist and then thrown up by the waterfalls. And if we do this numerous times with all these other photographs of clouds, we'll end up with a nice realistic hazy atmosphere around our waterfalls, not just a big airbrushy body at the bottom of the painting. So I'm just going to try and reposition it a little bit and change its transparency a little bit more, get it to sit in there nicely. Now the big mountain at the rear of the shot, I haven't been too happy with that. And earlier I didn't quite know exactly what I could do to fix it up, but I think what it is, it just seems like it's too close. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just put it behind the mountain on the right and try and change the haze values a little bit. It'll appear like that big rocky mountain is farther away. I think that's a lot better. A little bit of transparency to help it haze back into that sky, since there is a lot of sky value, sky pixels behind that mountain. Reduce contrast a little bit. Just keep I'm just going to keep tweaking the colors and the values on the mountain, make it a little more transparent. I think that'll do it for now. And I think it's time to focus our attention on the canyon with the waterfalls. So if you remember, we left part of this canyon incomplete. There's the part with the vegetation that is still part of the concept art. Part of the final matte painting. Try and matte out everything and just keep that little portion on the left. It has a nice amount of rock detail, and I like the fact that the rock has some brighter highlights and texture in it. for the greenery, just because it does have some sharper values. And if we stroke the airbrush at the same angle as the sun might be coming in, it'll give us some natural but subtle lines which might appear as sun rays. Subtle though. So I'm just cleaning up the edges a little bit, trying to get the greenery to read a little better. I think at the top here we're painting underneath some of the older layers of water, so it's not coming through completely. I'll have to clean that up later, but for now I'm just going to try and pop out some of the vegetation as well as some of the edges of rock down here. Anything that appears a little too bold, you know, you can go ahead and paint and then just come back and brush it over later with a softer brush. As I said earlier, if you try and keep a similar angle to what your sunlight might be coming in at, it gives you an overall sense of light shafts falling through the canyon. So there's still a kind of a undefined edge or undefined area over on the right side of our canyon there. So I'm just kind of searching for an element. I duplicated the cliff from the left. We'll see if we can use it again on the right. Change it up a little bit. Get rid of the parts we don't really want to see. Reveal the waterfalls again. I like the waterfalls. See if we can keep the greenery, and that one edge that runs down to the right suggests that we have our canyon kind of split into two major bodies, major fall-offs. Maybe rotate it just so it appears slightly different from where we used this photograph earlier. When you're duplicating, it's really easy to forget that you have duplicates happening, and ultimately you end up with a cloned look. And so you have to be careful. In this case, I'm duplicating it, but I'm essentially matting it out enough that hopefully it's not really noticeable. And in the end, I am going to have a little more haze. I'm going to put a few of those clouds, the extracted clouds, over top of the area. So I hope that of this, try and get rid of that lighter body in there. Seems as though there's some residual layers left over from earlier in the process. Try and find that and tone that down a little bit. Looks like we have a cloud floating right over top of the cliff that I just added. Don't really want that cloud there, so see if I can find it. And it's actually not over top, but it's underneath. And I'm just going to get back up to the top of the cliffs and continue painting in more vegetation. Create some little islands out there in the water. And the water I'll come back and repaint the water to make it more photorealistic later. Realistically, If you were to try and create a canyon like this with waterfalls entirely in CG, it would take a very long time, and arguably may not look completely photoreal when you're finished, just because there would be so much geometry and so many particles and mist. Alternatively, you could try and create a canyon like this with a model miniature in a stage environment, and certainly something like that has been done many times before. Maybe so ultimately, creating a shot, an environment like this as a matte painting really seems like the best solution at this point in time. Especially in this age of digital matte painting, we have the ability to animate things and have them moving around, particle effects for water or moving mist, and then certainly in the end have some type of camera push in or even make it a 3D matte painting. So let's turn our attention to the hillside back behind the palace. That layer was at 77%. I'm just going to knock it up to 100% for painting purposes. I put 77% in the title of the layer just so I remember later on to turn it back down to 77, which is the value that I liked it at. This way I can go in and I can add to the painting. Come up as a result from the color picker, and I would have been painting with a lighter value right now. Wouldn't have matched. So this is something I do quite often, just because, as you've seen, I like to put a lot of transparency in my layers so that I can haze things back. In areas like this over here, there's a little bit of a mismatch. I'm not too worried about that. The painting additions are a little too dark on the left, but I'll come back and address that. But I'm just looking for some nice tree masses at the top of this hill. A hillside like this, I think certainly, since 1K is our goal for the final movie of this shot, painting the hillside is definitely going to be acceptable. However, for 2K matte painting, if you were painting at 4K with a 2K output to film, you probably want to go in there and either paint more meticulous detail, it's pretty realistic, and again, you get all the alpha channels for free. But since my goal here is 1K painting, I'm just going to stick with the painting process. This is the quickest and fastest way to do it. Typically that's the way we try and do things in matte painting. Now I'm just going to try and blend the right side of this hill back into this behind the palace. Try and cover up some of the darker lines from the concept art, and see if we can get some blending happening back in there. Just make it look a little less distracting. I'm just going to flash that layer up there a little bit behind the palace. take a look overall, just scan around the painting, see if there's other things that we want to tweak right now. This mountain has a hard edge shadow in there. It doesn't really make sense with this matte painting. So I'm go in there and just pick a color and soften the shadow, paint an extension of the shadow as if the sun is lower. We keep it a little sharper near its source. That little hill on the mountainside is its source. And then as the shadow falls off a few hundred feet, it's going to get softer across the face of the mountain. So I'll just turn all the layers back on here and zoom out and take a look at the mountain again. I think the shadows are an improvement. A little bit more atmospheric haze back there on the mountains help push it back. And again, so now that scale is that mountain is starting to have the correct scales, the appropriate feel for the amount of texture that we had on there. So I'll turn my attention to the trees here on this foreground cliff. There's a couple trees that I kind of liked having in the concept art, and so I grabbed a couple tree renders that I made in View. Just some ambient lighting on them. It's another great use for having View. You can just create one or two quick trees, especially if they're going to be used in the distance. When you render them, of course, they come across with the alpha channel, and you get the chance, you have the opportunity to choose whatever type of lighting you want. So you can just throw some ambient lighting on there, or really quickly eyeball a sun angle if you have some trees that are sitting in the sun, and next thing you know you have some pretty decent trees with some nice leafy edges. So I think that having these trees is kind of nice in the composition, because otherwise this foreground cliff just becomes a big rounded corner. We don't really want a corner protruding out into the composition. Since it is kind of near the palace, having a little bit of a natural tree edge rising above the cliff and the bushes makes for a slightly nicer composition. So now I'm just going to copy a few of these trees back and lower them down on layers behind the two main trees there. And that'll give us the sense that there's more trees that are just kind of flowing down the cliff as the cliff drops off on the other side. I'm going to add a little bit of a blur to them just because they're very sharp. They are CG renders. Helps to match in with the photo reference. Photo reference in general has a tiny bit of blur when you compare it to CG renders. Not that the photographs are soft or shot out of focus, but if you study the way, if you study photography side by side with CG renders, you'll notice that CG is a lot sharper. So let's turn our attention to this cliff over here. If you remember, the cliff was just another copy of a cliff face from the left side of the matte painting. So instead of finding another cliff, I'm just going to go in here and try and paint in enough detail for it to appear like a different cliff, not a photographic copy. So I'm just going to do some color picking here and some painting. Pick some grays, spread them around, kill some of those big obvious white marks, and then go ahead and make some obvious white marks of my own so that the rock looks like it's still part of the same family. All rock in this valley we'll just assume is going to be the same type of granite or whatever rock it might be. If we spread these larger color patches around and cover up the existing ones, then ultimately it should look like it belongs here, but it won't look like a copy. And because we are working at 2K and we're reducing it down to 1K for our final goal, these little brush zoom out. I think that looks acceptable. Since there's so many layers, I'm just going to set my layer comps. Makes it easier to turn things on and off. Zoom out. And that's where we are right now.